There's a man in my pond. My family and I own a farm a few miles out of the city. I inherited this land, just as my father did before me. We have numerous ponds on our property, but the largest is located in the middle of our cattle field. It serves as a natural water source for our livestock. A couple months ago we started having an issue with our cows going missing overnight. I assumed some predator was hauling them off for dinner. I tried placing traps in the areas where the fence didn't fully meet the ground, but that didn't help at all. Shortly after, I lost another. In an act of desperation, I started putting up trail cameras around the field, hoping that maybe I'll be able to figure out how predators were getting in, and furthermore getting my cows off the property. There's a decent-sized tree close to the pond, and I attached a trail camera to it since most of the herd congregates around their water source. What I caught on that camera isn't the predator anyone imagined. In the middle of the night, an old man's head emerged out of the middle of the pond. It sat there staring at my cows for almost a half hour before it shot out of the water, running on all fours after my livestock. It managed to catch one of them, and I was in utter shock when I saw it rip my cow apart and drag it into the pond. Once the cow was underwater, no part of it ever emerged to the surface again. Can someone please explain to me what I just saw? I got hired for a hospital security position, and there's something severely wrong about this place. Almost every day I'm scheduled to work, there's an escaped patient or hostile family member that has to be taken care of before I can even clock in. I understand that things happen and working a position like this can be chaotic, but there's been 20 escaped patients in the 2 weeks I've worked here. 20 people within 14 days in a town with less than 2,000 residents. I'm not an expert, but it's hard for me to understand why that many people would want to escape life-saving medical care. And the extent the patients are willing to go to just to escape the hospital is more than disturbing. I have found patients on the hospital roof on numerous occasions, and others in the hospital's basement. A couple were in the vents and it took hours to get them out. I could understand patients walking out if they didn't agree with the medical staff's opinions regarding their care, but why would anyone risk getting stuck in the vents? We're talking all ages from middle school children to the elderly. My very first day on the job was spent trying to unlodge a 98-year-old woman from the vents above the hospital's morgue. But just a couple hours after we safely got her out, I heard laughter coming from the pediatric stairwell. I soon realized that there was a 13-year-old boy stuck vertically in the vent in the wall. I was so taken aback that I considered quitting on my very first day, but I thought it was just a creepy coincidence that both incidents occurred in the same day and that it was probably rare, so I went back the next morning. I no sooner walked into the hospital and I was greeted by an active threat lockdown. It turned out that this man's daughter was admitted into this hospital, and his wife never told him it was this hospital she was being brought to. The little girl needed surgery, and the doctors refused to allow him to bring her home because her condition could have caused death. Most parents would just request a transfer, not demand to bring their child home knowing that their child is getting worse by the minute. He was so enraged that he became violent with the staff, his family, and the other patients and visitors at the hospital. I honestly didn't think much of the incident until things like this continued happening day after day. I don't know what is going on at this point. This can't be a normal occurrence in any way. People lose their sanity in this hospital. The longest anyone has remained employed here is a little over a year, which speaks volumes. I don't know how much more I can handle. Something is in the sewer. Me and a few other guys were sent down to do some work in the sewer. This was our job. There was nothing out of the ordinary with this task. Just another day on the job. If you didn't know, parts of the sewer are like tunnels. That's the portion of the sewer we were sent to. As we traveled further away from the entrance, we knew something was wrong immediately. There shouldn't be blood in the sewers, and there was. A lot of it. All over the walls. We just looked at each other in silence for a minute before one of our guys headed back to the entrance to call the police. Being the brave and sometimes stupid people we were, the remainder of us pushed onwards in case someone was in need of help. The amount of blood we encountered was a telltale indication that whoever or whatever was injured was bleeding out. Raccoons don't bleed that much, and it wouldn't be smeared all over the walls. Clearly it wasn't normal. We continued on for what must have been 10 minutes before we found something. There was a body laying face down. From afar I could tell that it was the body of a woman. Her long blonde hair was matted and red from the pool of blood she laid in. At that moment I thanked God that our buddy was contacting law enforcement. That's the kind of sight that doesn't leave a person's mind. It burns itself into your memory and it haunts you. I shined my flashlight down the tunnel just to make sure there wasn't anyone hanging around that may have been responsible for the death of the woman in front of us. There was a shadow peering around the corner at the end of the tunnel. It came to a T shape and you could either go left or right. Whatever it was on the left side of the T. I saw its mouth open and a long tongue seemed to taste the air before it darted away. I don't know what it was, and I'm afraid to ask too many questions or go any further to find out. When the police arrived, our buddy brought them down the tunnel to the body. We gave them our statements and then left the sewer to let them do their investigation. When the official story came out with the details from the police, we found out that they found 3 more bodies further in the sewer, and a police officer is unaccounted for. They went into the sewer for the investigation and disappeared. The one thing that was never mentioned was the cause of death for any of the victims. They refused to release the information to the public. They haven't sent a search party to look for the missing officer either. Peeling apart. I was stationed overseas a couple years ago. In our free time, we did a lot of stupid things. We really shouldn't have gone exploring the way that we did considering we were United States soldiers in a country where conflict was common. But we had enough training to feel comfortable and we had firearms so we weren't extremely concerned. Things had quieted down the last few weeks so we decided to go check out the caves around our base. My friends weren't the smartest people in the world. When we arrived at the first cave, there was a bunch of pottery. They thought it would be fun to use the various pieces of pottery as target practice. As the sound of gunfire and shattering pottery filled the cave, another sound caught my attention. My friends heard the noise too, and 3 of them decided to go deeper into the cave to check it out while the rest of us stayed back. When they had been gone for 15 minutes and the noise we heard hadn't stopped, we got extremely worried. It sounded like someone was pulling something apart. I don't know how to explain a noise like that. The best thing I can compare it to is pulling packaging tape off of the roll. When the rest of our group ventured deeper in search of our missing friends, we came across one of the most horrific scenes of our lives. The noise we were hearing were people in the cave who were tearing their own skin and flesh off. Some of them had full bones exposed. For some unexplainable reason, our friends had joined this group of people and they were behaving the exact same way. My friend Philip had ripped his own eyes out and the optic nerves in both eye sockets were resting in the hollowed holes. Travis had cut his neck all the way around and he was prying off his skin starting from the neck and working his way down. He was doing this all while bleeding profusely from his throat. When I laid my eyes on Liam, I let out a scream that echoed throughout the entire cave. He had cut his entire chest cavity open, broke his chest bone apart, and quite literally peeled his chest cavity open. All of his organs were exposed. His intestines were in his mouth. He was eating himself alive. My screams didn't bother any of these people at all. They just kept mutilating themselves. I tried to get their attention. All of us called out our friends' names, but it was like they didn't hear a single word we said to them. We retreated back to our base at record speeds, and we immediately went to our higher-ups to tell them what was happening in that cave. After that, it was never mentioned again. Every time I would try to ask anyone about the incident, They acted like they had no clue what I was talking about. No answers were ever given about why my friends did that to themselves, or who the other people in the cave were. However, whenever I'm assigned to patrol around the caves, I can still hear that pealing noise. It's as faint as a whisper, but it makes the hair on the back of my neck stand up. It follows. Part 1. What started as an imaginary friend is far from imaginary now. It's been with me for years. Everywhere I go, it goes. Almost like an attachment. When I go to work, I see it lurking in the shadows, and nobody else seems to see it. Except for one time, and it didn't end well. I've come to the conclusion that it protects me. The only person who's ever seen it is someone who used to harass me at work daily. He was found dead on the floor of the copying room with blood pouring out of his eye sockets. I know he saw it because he walked into the copying room while I was in there, and I caught him staring into the darkness of the corner. My friend was hunched over just enough to fit in the room since the ceiling was only about 7 feet high. It's made entirely of bones. A voice in my head told me to leave the room as its long, rake-like clothes reached out towards my coworker. This had never happened before, so I listened to my head and left the room, closing the door behind me. Nobody heard any noise coming from the room. It was dead silent. As a matter of fact, nobody even knew my coworker was in there. Not until they found him in a pool of his own blood bleeding from his eyes. I should rephrase that. He was bleeding from where his eyes were supposed to be. All that was there was his empty, bloody eye sockets. I thought back to the way my friend was reaching towards my coworker, and it made sense. It used its claws to rip out his eyes. It should have disturbed me to my core, but instead it gave me a sense of safety. I wonder what it'll do when I visit my toxic family for our reunion. It follows. Part 2. I couldn't stop thinking about what happened in that copying room. The morning of my family reunion, that scene played in my head over and over again. If my friend didn't like someone being a jerk at my workplace, it was going to hate my family. Part of me chalked it up to my friend having anger issues, and I thought maybe I could control it. After all, if my friend wanted to protect me, it would surely listen to me, right? The whole drive there was nothing but anxiety for me. The possibility that my family could be completely wiped out was both therapeutic and horrifying. Those people never did anything for me aside from beat me into the ground on numerous occasions, mentally as well as physically. Although I went no contact with my entire family, the only person I was going to this reunion for was my grandmother. After COVID, the care facilities have made it such a headache to visit now, so I wanted to see her when she had a chance to get out into the world and enjoy it. If it wasn't for her, I'd have told each and every one of them to go to hell. The time had come. I was finally parked in front of my uncle's house. I grabbed my grandmother's gift I got her and walked up to the door. The greeting I received was far from pleasant. Regardless, I walked in and began scanning the crowd looking for my grandmother. When I finally spotted her, I approached her and gave her a big hug. She told me how much she had missed me and how good it was to see me. She was a smoker, so she announced that she was going to the garage and that she'd be back shortly. Not a single person offered to go out there with her, which pissed me off. She's 93 years old, and you have to walk downstairs from the main level when you enter the garage. So, I went to the garage with her. Not like those lazy good-for-nothing slobs would care enough to make sure she's okay. I put my arm under hers as we went down the stairs, and she thanked me for being such a good boy to her. This broke my heart in a million pieces. She deserved to be cared for, and nobody in the family could care less. After her cigarette, we went back inside. The entire house was blood red, and there were bodies everywhere. I never saw my friend once, but apparently he's been busy. And as he should. Those people were pieces of garbage anyway, and they definitely won't be missed. I'll tell you what I saw in there in part 3. Follows. Part 3. I'm glad that I walked into the house first before my grandmother. I couldn't forgive myself if she seen what my friend had done to our family. I had no idea what to say to her, so I told her to stay in the garage and to call the police. I told her something was wrong and that I would explain later. I ran inside as she dialed 911, and what I saw horrified me. The thing that I had been calling my friend was standing over a pile of my family's dead bodies, and it was absorbing them. The skin and flesh was pulling off of their bodies and was forming on the body of that thing. I let out a gasp of horror, and it turned around inhumanly fast to stare straight into my soul. I hadn't seen it since it killed my coworker, but now that it was in front of me, staring at me, I saw that it had eyes now. It all made sense. It took his eyes so it could see. That's why I haven't seen it. It's not protecting me. It was just capitalizing on its opportunities to become this giant humanoid monster. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw my aunt. She was still alive, but covered in blood. She was trying to get off the floor. Her hands were on the wall trying to pull herself up. The thing saw her too, and before I could even process the situation, it ran across the room and began dismembering her. Within seconds, all that remained was a pile of body parts. Once it was finished with her, it turned its attention back on me. Its chest cavity hadn't been covered with flesh and skin yet, and I could see that it was only missing one more thing to become truly living. All it needed was a beating heart. It was attached to me. It wanted my heart. I turned and ran back towards the garage door, and it was chasing me faster than I could run. I didn't have much further left. I prayed to God that I'd make it. I grabbed the door handle and desperately tried to get it open, but I was too late. It was already right behind me. I could feel its breath. That's the last thing I remember. I woke up in a hospital bed, and I was told that I needed a heart transplant. When I asked about my family, the hospital staff looked at me in confusion. Mr. Wilson, your family died in a house fire 5 years ago. No, that's impossible. These aren't false memories. My grandma was alive. This can't be happening. 5 years. Has it really been 5 years? Am I losing my mind? That night, I was about to fall asleep when I noticed something in the corner of the room, but it was really dark. It stepped into the moonlight coming through the window, and my heart started racing. It was the monster, and it was wearing my grandmother's head. Sandman. As a child, I was terrified of the dark, but there was a good reason why. Every night after my parents tucked me in, a tall bony creature would crawl through my window while I was paralyzed in fear. As the creature slowly contorted its way across my floor and onto my bed, I would start getting overwhelmingly sleepy. When it was sitting on me with its face inches above mine, that's when I would pass out every single night. I vividly remember the creature's breath being the last thing I felt before falling asleep. Once I was asleep, I would have the same nightmare every night. That creature would be chasing me on all fours until my parents woke me up in the morning. I dreaded weekends because my parents would let me sleep in since I didn't have school. When I finally told them about the nightmares, all they did was take me to therapy. This continued until I was 18. It suddenly stopped. I can't believe I survived. Something took over our plane and we went down. It happened so fast. We were halfway through our flight when we flew through what looked like a storm. When we broke through the clouds, the lightning was green. Not long after the murmurs of the other passengers began, I decided I should look out the window. That's when I saw it. I swear I saw a face in the green lightning, and it was staring at our plane. It only lasted for a moment before it disappeared, but I know I didn't imagine it. I exchanged a panicked look with the passengers beside me, and within an instant, the entire plane lost power. There was no lights. The masks didn't drop down. Nothing. And we started free falling. Nobody knew what was happening. We were in the dark both literally and figuratively. The lightning was flashing around us constantly, and it was actually blinding. The whole plane was lit up with a green glow that seemed to get brighter by the second. I started hearing the creaking of metal, and that's when the nose of the plane was ripped off and I saw the face again. Except this time, it had hands. I connected the dots and realized that this thing had ripped the nose off the plane itself while we were falling. What didn't make sense was the fact that even though our plane was actively crashing, this thing stayed right in front of us the whole time. It wasn't moving, but yet we were. It held the nose of the plane in its hand, and when it opened its mouth I knew what was about to happen. Green electricity surrounded the severed piece, and when it put it in its mouth there was a bright crack of lightning as it chewed. I could see the ground getting closer, and I knew that this was going to be the end of everyone on our plane. I curled into a fetal position in my seat, gripping the seat belt. I think that's the only thing that saved me. Those bright green hands ripped holes in the cabin of the plane, causing passengers to fly from the safety of the cabin. The only reason the suction didn't rip me from the plane was because of the way I wrapped my body around the seat belt. I didn't dare move, but I turned my head to see my surroundings, and I saw through the hole that the wing of the plane was missing. I also noticed that I didn't see any other passengers around me whatsoever. I could see the green electricity wrapping around the body of the plane, and the next thing I knew, I almost flew from my seat as the cabin crashed into the ground. If I'm being honest, I was convinced that I was no longer living. Had the plane not been torn to pieces the way it had been, it would have exploded on impact. I was severely injured, but somehow I managed to unbuckle myself and get out of what was left of the plane. I was expecting to be struck down by lightning the second I emerged, but that didn't happen. When I looked up at the sky, I saw that horrifying face looking down at me, smiling before it disappeared. To this day, the pilot, flight attendants, and other passengers are unaccounted for. Everyone tells me that I had a panic attack and that I hallucinated the face because of the traumatic event I went through. However, that would be impossible considering that I saw it before we ever started crashing. I will never get on a plane again. I'm lucky to be alive. Sometimes I still see a crack of that green lightning and it horrifies me to my core. Something tells me that I wasn't meant to survive, and it's only a matter of time until it comes back to finish me off. Some say it's PTSD, but I know I'm right. The dig site curse. I've been an archaeologist for 12 years, and I work alongside a dedicated team of 8. A few years ago, we found remnants of what looked like an ancient village. Our team had been waiting months to find something significant to work on, so this was the break we needed. What are the odds that we chose to explore an area we usually avoid and came across our biggest find of the year? My team worked together to rope the area off until we could set up a proper enclosure if our findings proved to be promising. The team's lead scientist, Dale, approached me and told me that he had no idea what this place could possibly be. He informed me that the historian of our team had claimed that it didn't make sense and that there shouldn't be anything here. I told Dale that this was an area we didn't go through very often and that we probably missed it the last times we were here. Even though Dale and the historian Ben were focused on figuring out how we had missed this, I was concerned about getting started and making progress. Our standard procedure when we come across a site is to set up camp nearby so we can ensure no damage occurs to the site. By the time we stumbled across it, it was close to 6 o'clock, We didn't have a ton of daylight left, and eventually we would have to set up camp. It's possible that I might have been too eager to get started for my own good. I got started like I would at any other site. Not too far beneath the surface, my handheld shovel hit something hard. Not knowing what it was, I started removing all the earth around the object as gently as possible until a clay object became visible. As I carefully removed the object from the ground, I noticed that it was rectangular in shape and had a form of ancient writing across the entirety of the surface. This was a huge find. I was so excited that I dropped my shovel and ran to the rest of the team, interrupting them as they were unpacking our camping gear. After taking one look at the clay tablet, the historian's face turned ghostly pale. I kept asking him, "What's the matter, Ben? What's wrong?" He shakily asked me where I had found the tablet, so I told him to follow me and I brought him to the area. Ben dug into the ground with his hands for a few minutes before he stopped and slowly turned to look at me, still as pale as a ghost. At this point I was getting sick of the way he was acting. I thought we should have been excited that we found something like this. Just as I opened my mouth to say something, he cut me off by saying that we hadn't stumbled upon a village. We had found the resting place of an entire civilization that had disappeared thousands of years ago. I asked him how he knew, and when he stood up from where he was digging, dozens of human bones fell from the wall of earth. He said he recognized the language on the tablet, and that's why he was so startled. This civilization was known for having curses. Since we found so many bones, he was extremely concerned. When the rest of my team found out about everything, each one of them quit and left. I now see why. Fast forward 3 months out of 8 people, only to remain alive, me and Dale, my colleagues, mysteriously dropped dead of heart attacks one after another. Dave and I weren't spared though. I was diagnosed with a rare blood disease, and Dale lost his eyesight. Every day, I regret finding that place. I should have just left it alone. We should have stayed home.